Hi and welcome everybody. Welcome to the show, Meeting with Changemakers. Today I have Tom Harper here. Hi Tom, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Good to meet you.
Thanks for your time and I appreciate you being here. Tom actually is an expert in circular economy or has become an expert through live events, I would say, listening a bit to his story. So I'm very curious to get to know you a bit more. Maybe you can tell our viewers and listeners where you're coming from, what you're doing actually, and secondly, what brought you into circular economy?
Okay, well, where I come from in terms of my relationship to the circular economy, I became very interested in the idea of ecology and environmental justice in the early 2000s, and then I joined a organization called the Pachamama Alliance, which you may be familiar
Mm-hmm.
with, um, and that was a great introduction into looking at things from a more systemic perspective around economics and around how we structure our societies in relation to how well we treat the planet. Today I'm the managing director of a company. It's a family business that my stepfather set up in the 1980s called Unusual Industries. And I took over from him a couple of years ago. And was before that, I had been working as an actor for about 10 years, having a really good time prancing around on stage and occasional film and television jobs, which was all excellent and good travel opportunities. But I got to the point where A, I had a very young family. B, it was a toss up between being a werewolf in a B movie in Romania, 3 months away from home, whilst my children were small, or coming back and not working for a bit. And at that time, I was part of an organization called the Transition Town Network. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Haven't heard it.
Transition Norwich. I was on the core group, and we were looking at setting up a community-supported agriculture scheme within Norwich, as well as looking at other initiatives, grassroots initiatives, to start building a bit of community resilience in the face of peak oil and climate change. I set up a small company called Community Solutions East with
When was that again? In which year?
this was in 2009,
Mm-hmm.
2008, 2009.
Just after the
Yes,
financial crisis, basically. Another
that's
crisis.
right. Yeah, yeah. I was still working as an actor at the time, but doing less work as an actor. And I'd moved up to Norfolk in the east of England, where my wife and I had married. And we had two very young children, and my stepdaughter, who was 9 by that point. So yeah, it was great. We were doing a mixture of sort of community-based workshops. I set up a small company with a doctor of climate policy from the Tyndall Centre at the University of East Anglia, a chap called Dr. Alex Haxeltine. And he provided the science and the metrics and the data. And with that data, I made it accessible by turning it into workshops for years 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 school children around that part of the world. So I'd run a program called the Oil Game, which was a workshop to teach children about oil and the proliferation of oil within our economy and the importance of it and the benefit of it, but also the impact of it from a climate change perspective. And then I finished working as an actor and decided I wanted to do something steadier. So I spoke to the family firm. I said, look, is there an opportunity here? Do you have a sustainability coordinator? The answer was no. I said, well, how about I do that? And I move and work there. So that took place around 2013. And at that time, I also discovered the Circular Economy MBA that Ellen MacArthur had devised in collaboration with the University of Bradford. And that was just amazing because it pulled together stuff that I didn't think I was going to understand about, business accounting and old school business, neoclassical business economics. But then on the top of it was this brilliant living language of the circular economy. So I was really inspired, from a description of the circular economy, I would say everybody understands what a circle is, but few people get what the economy really means. And for me, the easiest way to understand the economy in relation to the circular economy is to take it right back to the Greek root word oikonomos, which basically
Mm-hmm.
means household management. So how well are we managing our home? And can we do it in a more circular way, i.e. in a way that doesn't just take, make, waste? Can we do it in a more regenerative, restorative, and enjoyable way where we're all, working towards the common good? So yeah,
Interesting. So yeah, it's funny, not from being an actor to becoming an expert in economics. It's a quite jump. It's a
yes,
quantum jump, if you want to think so, no?
it is. Well, that's no disrespect to actors, but you're right. It is quite a jump because you're not, most of the time when you're an actor, you're exposed to extraordinary sort of narratives and stories that you're a part of, but you don't necessarily become, you don't necessarily need to be responsible for thinking about the bigger economic picture. Well, that was my experience anyway.
So
So
then I
yeah,
think of the entertainment industry, no? Because then you ask for being the sustainability expert within the same industry. So you
yeah.
changed basically your role, but you stayed in the industry. So what can I understand about the impact of this industry? Of course, I think of electricity, but what else are the impacts that you would have to deal with, the negative ones, and how could you transform those then in a more circular setting?
Okay. Well, for my dissertation, which I was very pleased with the result, the focus was on how to transition the UK arts industry and the theatre industry towards a more circular economic model. Um, the UK theatre industry and the theatre industry globally used to get a bit of a reputation for being, it was called the eco-vandal of the arts at one point by a Guardian columnist about 10 years ago or so. The reason being is because there was, there's a lot of resource use that for set design or whatever for theatres, and then at the end of the production, it was all just thrown away. And that is now changing and has been changing for some time. And so I took the opportunity to apply the circular economy lens to that industry at large and think, well, what are the inhibitors to change? What are the institutional conditions that are limiting or restricting a quick and accelerated transition to a circular economy? And some of them were to do with, some structural changes were to do with simple things like, well, the designer and the director for any big West End show, they have the IP, they have the intellectual property on the design of the set.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want people to use it afterwards because for them it's about their value and their work.
Like a business secret in a
Yeah,
way.
exactly. And they don't engage enough of the other stakeholders like the freelance designers and the freelance set designers and the lighting designers, etc., at the beginning, at the outset of the conversation. So as a result, there didn't used to be a discussion around, well, what resources can we use? How can we use resources in a circular way? Is there a resource library of previous sets being held or stored somewhere that we can make use of? So one of the simple system tweaks was to think about turning that IP, intellectual property, into intellectual prosperity. So it's the idea of, well, let's extend the value of what you've created for this one show in the West End by you get a royalty for any element that might be reused by regional theatres or by touring theatres or by student theatres in universities. Then obviously the system tweaks there are that you need space, you need warehouse space. And so there are lots of really positive conversations taking place. And the National Theatre in the UK is really leading on this idea of managing their resources more towards a circular economy.
Very interesting. You mentioned something like the sharing economy in a way. So I was already thinking about the logistics. How would you all bring these requisites from one place to the other? So like you mentioned, the warehouses may be needed or other shared platforms, but the idea is so powerful. Like when we talk about permaculture, I think in many permaculture courses they mentioned that, no? Why if you're thinking of a suburbia, everybody has a lawnmower. Yeah.
Yes.
But maybe you use it maybe once a month or something, and the rest of the time it's just there, wasting even away. But because not using something is even sometimes worse than using it all the time.
Yes.
So we should just by bringing resources together, we can save so many resources and of course emit less CO2. No, so this was for you one of the success stories in the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. So at work, what I was able to do really was, once I got immersed in the theory of the circular economy and economics in general, I thought the relationship between business and sustainability has always been quite strained. And there's been a guilty secret, which everybody just this unexamined assumption that they're actually not, they don't complement each other. So when you speak to more old school economists or business leaders, they think sustainability is about doing less bad. But the implied assumption there is that you're still doing bad, you're just doing less of it. So circular economy comes along and it says, well, no, we're creative beings, and we might live on a finite planet, but we have infinite creativity. So let's just redesign the model so that we're not just doing less bad, we're doing more good regeneratively all of the time. So I took these theories and these themes, and then I thought, great, I've got the opportunity to apply this in practice. So we held some design meetings at work, and we talked about how can we reuse our resources and remanufacture and refurbish in a more effective way for our customers, which we were kind of doing anyway, but with less clarity and less precision on the processes. So we set up a bit of software that enabled us to track things, to see who last inspected things, to see what the component life cycles were within those, fixed assemblies. And we also did simple things like redesigning some of the packaging. So some of our equipment, electric chain hoists, goes down to London theatres in road boxes. Historically, those road boxes were fixed with only the capacity to carry one type of hoist. One of the guys at work, the head of the motor shop, he said, well, if we design it so that we can put the wooden slats in at different sizes, at different measurements.
More modular.
More modular, exactly. We can get 4 different types of hoist in there.
Interesting. So small ideas, no, that they can make a big change, no?
Yeah, and it's about instead of assuming the mantle of the expert, it's about engaging everybody with a very simple perspective. How can we do things better? How can we be more material responsible? And once you engage everybody's a stakeholder, and everybody can start thinking from their own perspective. Well, I've got the ability to control the supply chain here. Or I can have some conversations with this department over there, or whatever it might be, to think about more circular solutions.
And I think this is actually where I find now the biggest challenge, even when it comes to consulting or transferring the idea of circular economy, because there's no one size fits all approach. It's so diverse. That what you say, the dialogue is so important. Or the co-design in the design phase, bringing in people, because you come in there, you want to bring the change, but you don't have the solution. You have to work out the solution with the people involved. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think this is the big difference, not to other models that we want to implement. Like if you want to implement a certain accounting scheme, it just tells you do A, B, C, and D, and that's it. You have your protocols already set up. But that's exactly not the case for circular economy, because you every time have to engage into a new process. Although there is similarities, there is certain best practices, but it's still very individualistic, the approach for each company or each problem in a way.
That's right. Yeah, it's really bespoke. I think there are some principles which are really strong guiding principles, running on renewables, designing for disassembly, more modular design, turning waste into a feedstock for other industries, whatever it might be. There's some really good guiding principles, but you're right. The fundamental engagement is going to be so bespoke and unique to each respective company.
Interesting to think about now, ecosystems that have to be created when we think of circular economy, because listening to you, maybe we have the impression, or in general, that we have to solve it on a company level. But you can see, and maybe you can then tell me your experience, that my circularity depends so much from how my ecosystem around me is giving me also the opportunity to be circular. Now, because when we think of ecosystems, we have always maybe certain plants or certain insects. They just have a fulfilling a function in the ecosystem, and that's why they're
Yes.
there, not for anything else. So when I then think of transferring that idea to economy, that means we would have to have some institutions, certain things in the economy that don't exist for profit, but for the ecosystem of a circular economy, no?
Yeah.
So thinking of your case, what are those institutions maybe, or the ecosystem services that you would need to be more circular?
Well, we work within the technical sphere, if you like. So if you're familiar with the idea of the butterfly diagram that was developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which was a very simple way of depicting how the economy works in terms of resources. On the one side, you have biological nutrients, and on the other side, you have technical nutrients. So we're, in many ways, it felt quite hard and fast, the opportunities there, felt quite clear. We're dealing with steel and aluminium in Europe, and obviously coming from Ukraine, where aluminium is predominantly manufactured. There are obvious supply chain issues going on there at the moment. But the work around aluminium in general, and the manufacture of aluminium and the recycling of it is quite robust. There are still opportunities to refine the process. But us as the end user of equipment, we don't manufacture our own technical equipment. We depend on supply chains. So I spoke to our key suppliers and said, look, these are our ambitions. We want to be able to completely close the loop, which means making an assessment of, say, a type of equipment, working out what the duty cycle is on that equipment and the life cycle, and then thinking about, well, which component parts break down first, and what can we do with them? What are they made from? Is it one material glued toxically to another material? Can we redesign and redevelop? So our suppliers have been really ambitious and inspired to engage with this, and in their own respective ways, they are sort of applying the approach of a circular economy.
And thinking about the public sphere around the theaters, did the public sector play a role in the transition, or what role could have played?
Well, the theatre industry in itself is primarily comprised of a huge freelance community. So some of the barriers to accelerating the transition to the circular economy were based on the fact that there's little autonomy and there's little power held by 70% of the industry is comprised of freelancers who are just literally trying to make ends meet, going from job to job. And they might not necessarily have control over the bigger players within the industry, organizations that provide a service. So the conversations have been had within the industry for the last, well, they were seriously being taken at big event organizations and big conferences since 2015. I was part of an organization called SIPA, which is the Sustainability and Production Alliance. And that was a really great way of disseminating information. And since then, that things have really developed. So there's now the Theatre Green Book, which has been created, which was established by a group of architects who wanted to say, look, let's look at these principles of circularity and let's apply them in the built environment within the theatre industry, the refurbishment of theatres and the build of new theatres and the use of venues in a more environmentally sustainable way. So the good news is there's a lot of conversation that has been going on now for over 10 years.
It's great. It's great. No, but that's what I'm thinking about a lot, not the personal responsibility. I like also what you said about the oikonomia, and that in the end, a lot of things start from home, no? And then I think, okay, I want to be more circular. And where I live, just the pure recycling, which is not even talking about circularity. In a way it is, but recycling comes last as our options. I almost have barely all the containers I need available at hand in walking, because I'm also living on the countryside. It's not really countryside. There is containers, but sometimes they even put new containers, but then they put a new container for everything. I'm like, why couldn't you just put a yellow one there? So that's one thing. So I barely find all containers that I need in one spot. So I always have to even take my car and drive from A to B just to recycle, which is a huge effort. You know, in a way, you can say, okay, customers and end users, they should be taking into responsibility. Yes, but up to what point can you really say it's bearable, you know? Because when I have the conversations at home and I have to take trash in the car, I know my family is not so happy about it. And I'm like, but that's resources, yeah?
Yeah.
So it is even like I have to deal with barriers even in my little
Yes,
environment.
more
Although
personal.
everybody would agree, hey, recycling is important, but then that's what I mean. We need ecosystem services, like
We
just the fact you
do.
have containers. Yeah.
We do. And I think there's been a huge disruption to the natural speed and the natural sort of momentum that was building a few years ago with regard to circularity. For an example, there's a company called the Little Red Bin Company in Ireland. Have you heard about them?
No.
Their business model is basically they're a private sector business that deal with trash. And their business model is that they weigh the bins of the community. So they come along, and before they drop them into the respective categories, either recycling or the general waste, they weigh the bin, and the weight predicates the cost to the customer. So if the bin is actually not weighing very much, the bill that month will be less. So it's an incentive to get people to really think about, well, how much am I throwing away here? So that's a really good example of an ecosystem tweak, ecosystem adjustment in line with we're not getting rid of the underlying problem, which is that we generate vast amounts, tons and tons of waste that can't be properly reused. But we are dealing with awakening people to the idea of their respective responsibility in the waste that they generate as a household.
And it makes me a bit philosophical, really, talking to you about this, no? Because when we think about, we talked about this a bit earlier, that we should have the economy serving us and not us serving the economy. And I see a big issue in just daily life with circularity or sustainability. It's not an excuse, but I just see it as a fact, because we have such a fast life. You need, or many people say, I need this convenience of, I need to grab a coffee to go, or I need to buy something packed in the supermarket instead of me doing all the processes. Although maybe you, for example, I like to cook, but now with kids and work and everything that's going on, it's really hard sometimes to say, okay, now I need 1 hour where I just stay in the kitchen and I cook the food properly. And this is, and just because of the speed of life, no? And the other day, somebody was here also, Anna. She has this, her website is even called Anna Go Slowly, as telling herself, you need to go slowly. And no, it makes me think that many problems we see, I think, is because we're going too fast in many ways, no? And then we need convenience to mix that up. So in a way, we need circular economy is one approach, but it doesn't take the speed out of consumption. It doesn't take the speed out of society, no? So, any ideas or experiences on going slower, or how can we change actually our way of living to make this easier for us, you know?
There's a great book called In Praise of Slow by Carl Honore, which you might be familiar with, which is a fantastic piece of writing. I think he wrote it in sort of 2005.
It's old, yeah. It's an old book, yeah.
Yeah, it is quite old now.
Relatively.
And in that, he completely outlines that. You know, he talks about how people like Gandhi would say there's more to life than increasing its speed. Yesterday, I was looking at a thing on the news about some roller skates. They're called moonwalker boots. They look like roller skates, but they're not. And the whole purpose of them is so that people can walk normally, but move as if they're running. Is that some tech genius in America has created them, and it's an incredible creation. But it's an indictment of what we're all trapped in, this idea that we have to rush through lives. And I think technology doesn't help. We're so fractured, because when you want to spend that hour cooking food, you're probably going to have your mobile phone next to you. It's going to be pinging every 30 seconds. So I think it's a personal choice as well to try and to notice it and to try and step out of it. But I also agree that from a macroeconomic point of view, I don't think the circular economy is fully realized yet in terms of ensuring that we are not subordinate to the economy at large, but rather the economy serves us as a global community in a meaningful and a healthy and an ecologically literate way, where we still have a way to go with that. And I agree with you that the circular economy can be used by the old mindset, the old paradigm around capitalism as a way of saying, well, we still want fast and conspicuous consumerism, but we're just going to do it in a way that is more ecologically restorative.
Like replacing petroplastics with bioplastics, and then
Yes,
that's the
exactly.
solution. Huh?
Yeah.
So I'm a bit afraid of that we still want to maintain our own way of living. Please, let's not change anything. Let me keep doing what I'm doing. And you just change out the materials and make it carbon neutral, but I can keep consuming thoughtlessly. That's what I'm a bit afraid of, and I have sometimes the feeling the political discussion goes so much in that way, and it's pushed by companies.
Yeah.
But I still believe in the good seed, so I don't want to demonize those efforts and call everything greenwashing. And so it can happen very quickly that we demonize good efforts. So
that's right. But I think we have to be very circumspect and very analytical about it. And we don't want to blame the darkness. We want to bring in the light. So where people are trying to do better things, it's worth exploring it and saying, well, this is a system tweak, but of a system that is actually dysfunctional. It might be that what we might call it greenwashing. Somebody, a car manufacturer might say, well, we're going to move to biodiesel instead of diesel. We're going to move to bioethanol. And that's a system tweak of a system that doesn't really work. And meanwhile, most of us, as we're rushing around, there's so much research and there's so much evidence out there now that's slowing down, and it is so much more beneficial. And having access to green spaces, and there's research now that says that spending an hour outside and getting your hands in the dirt, in the ground, doing some gardening or doing some permaculture work, there's more beneficial properties. There's billions of microorganisms in one cubic inch of soil that create an extraordinary reaction in your immune system biologically and also in the brain, that they're supposed to be more effective than any antidepressants that have been manufactured by the pharmaceutical industry to date, or just as effective 1 hour outside in nature.
I think even doctors in Norway, they prescribe their patients for antidepressants to go to the forest, to walk in the forest. And for other health benefits. Yeah, I mean, this would be, I think, a whole different time we talk about this, because this is also an endless story. Another thing that I would like to discuss with you is the role of the donut economy, because you also mentioned it beforehand, and I'm also convinced about the circular economy, and that we need, or let's say there's no other model for the economy than a circular economy that can have a future. But I'd say it doesn't go as far enough as we need, because the social issues are not really covered in the typical circular economy model. And that's why I love the idea of the donut. We really need the social base, because you can have a circular economy and completely disparity between rich and poor, and it's still not going to be a happy place to live.
Absolutely.
And I think of places where they maybe produce things in a prison, but then you make production circular, and that all of a sudden now is the solution. So for me, also the social aspect are very important. So any thoughts on that, experiences?
Well, I agree with you. I think it was some of the work that I found to be very meaningful was working in grassroots community movements when I lived in Norwich and was part of the transition town movement there. The sense of enthusiasm and the sense of community that was built from simply from some simple volunteer work, like engaging the community in a community supported agriculture scheme and meeting people on the farm, that being able to borrow some land, some spare land from local landowners, and setting up a large acreage space to generate enough food to then sell to the shareholders, which was the local community supported agriculture people. So I see that reconnecting with the local economy, or looking at opportunities to create cohesion within one's local community, and therefore sort of enriching that local economy, as having an immediate impact on that concept of social justice and the donut economic model of ensuring that people are actually enriched by their experience of living and being and working together towards these principles.
So then taking this and starting to be creative, I could say your hypothesis would be implementing community-based stakeholder approach circular economy models can guarantee social positive impact.
Yes, I believe so. But getting it done, like you mentioned before, I think we're all so fractured, and we're all in such a constant state of rushing around. I think at the moment it's exacerbated by global geopolitical events that are taking place, that we can't underestimate, the psychological impact they have, even if we don't even realize, even if we think we're not thinking about them. The impact of knowing that there's an invasion of a country in Europe at the moment, that there are lots of sort of interesting geopolitical events unfolding from China through Iran. It's difficult not to feel weighed down by that for people. But I think that the way to step out of it is to stop, spending quite so much time looking on the phone and reading the news, and to see what opportunities there are out there within one's community, because there are, little community notice boards. Somebody's saying that they're giving free piano lessons, or somebody's got some power tools that they want to hire. And it's just making connections at a much more local level, and not being so distracted by the global events, which we have very little autonomy and control over, to start building up from the ground up.
That's true. Yeah, community approach. No, I really like. Yeah. So I'm still a big fan of public libraries. Yeah. And what happened to go into a library, take out books, bring them back? Even now, I've discovered it again, the nice value of going there with your children, just spending a nice, and it's also nice for them to learn, okay, I take care of this book, I bring it back, and I want somebody else to read it, to just appreciate things and appreciate this public service. No, so I'm a big fan of that. No, and now when I also think of my own business, we did this balance sheet for the economy for the common good, and one is the improvement plan, which is in there. No, and where I see that I would like, apart from the ecological sustainability, I focused on many years, like low footprint, permaculture. But I have a feeling that myself, even I lost track of the social impact a little bit. So now I want to really say my business, I want it to create local impact, help local impact. So I'm going, for example, to the local church, engaging with them, because they're engaged with so many local groups. People go, it's a place where people go to find help. So what better place to find these multiplicators, if you want to say so? It can be NGOs, it can be a church, any humanitarian organization, and start from there. And I have really great experiences, and this gratitude of you help and you get so much gratitude back, and this is such a reciprocal process. And this is a great way.
Absolutely. I think, engaging with any sort of local community groups, whether through faith groups or sports communities, or whatever it might be that people have an inclination towards, there's so much traction there always. And within going back to my work, we decided to try and build community from within the company. So we allocated space on the land for a vegetable patch. So now about 15 to 20% of the workforce are growing chili plants and carrots,
so cool,
and cabbages through the summertime, and it really brings people together, in their lunch break, to be able to go down, get their hands in the soil. So I think any SME business leaders or people who have the opportunity to use some land in that way, it has an extraordinarily positive effect on the workforce, on the community at work. And we have aspirations to go further with that. So we're going to be building a new set of offices, which we're aiming to be way ahead of any legislation, way ahead of even 2030 or 2050 legislation. We want it to be one of the very first circular economy designed buildings in Northamptonshire.
Very interesting. Please keep me posted on that one.
I will do, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because in the process of doing it, we've consulted with sustainability experts, a fantastic London-based consultancy company. But they admitted to begin with that they were constricted by the only regulations they knew to be out there, which were around the passive house scheme. So we were kind of heading in that regulatory direction, but that was actually that was counter to our circular economy agenda. And also as counter to having fresh air circulating in a meaningful way, like a termite mound, mimic nature. But we're getting there with that, and we've just received planning permission, which is really exciting.
Great.
So we aim to start breaking ground or regenerating ground from July of next year.
Great. Like I said, I really need to stay focused on updating on that one. So
yes,
definitely when the blueprint, when the first ground is taken, or when the first time the stick comes through ground, then we can have another presentation here, I think. So to round up a little bit, to give maybe some advice and your point of view. First, I would like to know which industries or which part of the circular economy you find specifically difficult still to implement. First question, and the second would be, what do you think is quite easy for us to implement? So yin and yang.
So starting with the difficult, I think. I mean, if I look at it through the lens of our own experience with business, some material options are still difficult to find alternatives to. Although in the main, I would say 90% of the materials that we use, or maybe more, 95% of the materials we use all have circular potential. And we have engaged in the material use in such a way that it benefits our business and it aligns with the principles of a circular economy through remanufacture, refurbishment, reuse, and last loop, if necessary, recycle. So that is taking place. But there's just a small band of materials, usually fabric-based materials, which are harder to operate a circular economy agenda on. Low-hanging fruit, I think, I mean, it really depends. But again, looking at it from the lens of the technical sphere, the technical nutrient sphere, or the technosphere, as the circular economy calls it, tracking things, using digitization, using software, using cloud-based software systems, virtualizing, creating passports for every item of equipment that you have. Even if you're going to sell it, keeping a passport on it, if you like, means that you can track its digital footprint and see its use in its life cycle, so that you can make better decisions into the future about engaging resource use in a more circular way.
Very interesting.
And trying to engage the community. That's the low-hanging fruit. Talking to one's work community or one's local community about the principles of a circular economy or the principles of donut economics, which actually I think is a step ahead of the circular economy now. Is integrating the circular economy, but with more of a social justice leaning.
I think so too. So let's start first with circular economy, and when everybody's ready, we go to the donut economy. Yeah, because I think it's so much to ask for. Many times when I talk now, then the idea of circular economy for us, it seems natural, because maybe sustainability, like you said, goes too short. We sustain what we do. No, we can't sustain what we do. We have to do more than that. So sustainability actually, in a way, it goes too short, but that's still the term that's everybody understands. And then as soon as you start talking about regenerative, circular, you lose a lot of attention, because then it's getting so complex. So, but the circular economy, I think, is the ground idea. Like I said, everybody can imagine a circle. So this is something everybody can somehow visualize. And this is a great starting point. I see so many positive effects of circular economy. I do see the shortcomings, and I'm glad we talked about some of them. But I think it's like you said, we should focus on how can we do more good and not talk about the doom side of the world.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I definitely think that empowers people to focus on what more good we can do. And we are infinitely creative. Whilst we live on a finite planet, there is an extraordinary system working biologically where one seed from one apple can create a tree that then can generate millions of apples through a lifetime. And that's a phenomenal thing to observe. And yet we've created an economy of scarcity effectively, which is literally counter to what the natural world shows us.
Abundance is actually what we can aim for if we do it right. And I agree completely with you. And thank you for using the metaphor of the seed. That's also my main lemma, no, that from a seed you can create abundance if you take right care of it, if it goes into the right environment, if you work the soil and let it regenerate.
Yes.
So speaking of that, let's regenerate. Thank you so much, Tom, for your time. I hope to speak to you again. Take care of you and your family, and thank you so much again.
And you, thank you, Philip. Thanks very much.